Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and thanks for spending it with us here at the Lager Line, the show served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the Rockets in Houston, Texas. As always, this is the show where we discuss weekly everything going on with Houston Rockets basketball. The past week, not great. The Rockets have lost 4 straight home games, including a pair in back-to-back fashion against the Spurs and Magic, 2 of their rebuilding rivals. But the good news today, we're going to be looking a bit more macro than micro. If you want some discussion of what's been going on the court the last few days, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose. You can follow my co-host Paolo Alves on Twitter at Paolo Alves NBA. You can also go to rocketswire.usatoday.com. But quite frankly, I think those of you listening to this podcast, the Houston Rockets diehards, you know what's been going on. You know that the Rockets were flummoxed by an Orlando Magic zone last night that should have not been as difficult as the Rockets made it seem to solve. So if you want more on that, of course, you can check out the websites, but we want to be more positive here, especially with this being the holiday season. And we're going to talk about something a bit more uplifting, and that's the potential pursuit of James Harden in 2023 free agency. There was a report from Tim McMahon of ESPN on his Howdy Partners podcast released on Tuesday of this week. I'm going to read you guys an excerpt. They've got like $60 million potentially in cap space this summer, McMahon says of the Rockets. This is not Oklahoma City, Salt Lake City, or San Antonio. This is Houston, a potentially desirable market for free agents. It will be fascinating to see how free agency plays out. You know how the league works. There's already a lot of gossip and dot connecting. Hey, if things don't work out in Philly, keep an eye out on James Harden back in Houston, or going back to Houston, excuse me. I think keep an eye out on that is certainly fair. First, let's see how things work out in Philadelphia, where they're starting to play really good basketball. Also, does that make sense from a Rockets perspective? Well, guys, that's what we're going to be discussing on today's show. I think it's going to be a bit more entertaining than going into the nuance of why exactly the Rockets are losing in humiliating fashion. They were blown out by the Spurs and the Magic. They led by 15 points midway through the third quarter before being dominated over the final 18 or so minutes of that game to ultimately lose by 6. So rather than go into that, if you want more micro analysis game by game, you can check out our archives here at the Lager Line. But today we're going to spend things a bit more positive as we get closer to the 2023 offseason, which is the true pivot point for this franchise, as we've said many times before. Because of the up to $60 million in salary cap space, they're going to have all sorts of financial flexibility. Also, one more lottery pick coming in to add to this stockpile of young talent. So we're going to be looking at potential avenues for them to upgrade, most notably the James Harden path, one of the 2 or 3 greatest players in the history of this franchise. I would argue that's certainly an option that's going to draw a lot of attention. There's others as well. We'll talk about some of those today. And I guess the good place to start would be by introducing our panel. Of course, we've got Paolo Alves, our normal co-host and producer out of Portugal. Paolo, how's it going, my friend?
What's up, Ben? Doing good. Other than usual Houston Rockets problems, everything's going well.
Yeah, at least it's the holiday season. To use the KPJ line the other day, that's why things are going bad, right?
Yeah, if you see me make worse arguments than usual, it's probably because of the holidays. That's totally the reason.
And we've also got with us today James Piercy, staff writer with The Dream Shake, and also contributor to The Chop Shop. James, how's it going, my friend?
It's going good, man. Appreciate you guys having me on. I don't know how we'd expect an NBA team to play good basketball during Christmas, though. That's outrageous.
Yeah, I get it. Well, hopefully we can podcast better over Christmas, better than how the Rockets have played basketball over Christmas. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
Anyway.
man. It's not like the NBA is the sport that's known for the Christmas games or anything, and it's not like these guys, like, we all know that these are players that are like grizzled old vets. They're all um, family men, right? That they all have their kids to look after
Yeah.
during the holidays. It's it's a tough time for everyone.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. And full disclosure for our audience, we're recording this on Thursday, the 22nd. So this is coming off the Orlando game. They have not played the finale to this 7-game homestand yet. It's amazing how quickly this has de-escalated, by the way. They were 2-0 to start the homestand, wins over Milwaukee and Phoenix. I know Phoenix was shorthanded, but the Milwaukee win was probably their best of the entire season. Now, all of a sudden, they're 2-4. They're going to be underdogs, understandably, against Luka Doncic and the Mavs on Friday night. So you're probably looking at a 2-5 homestand and really uncompetitive losses to the Spurs and the Blazers. And then after leading most of the Magic game, to be outscored by 20 plus over the final 18 minutes, really demoralizing. Again, it's not just about the wins and losses. Understand that this is a rebuilding season. We know what the goal is, but to see them look that lost compared to peers of theirs, which is what I think the Spurs and Magic are, it's a bit deflating in the micro. But again, that's why we're talking macro today. We don't want to bum you guys out. And the rumor of the week, of course, is what I led off discussing with James Harden. And I'm not even sure it's fair to say rumor of the week. We're talking about it because Tim McMahon put it out on his podcast. But honestly, we've discussed it for months. The dots are there. Tim McMahon is just saying that people around the league are connecting those dots. And it is useful in the sense that, it confirms that we're not crazy. We're not reaching. Other people around the league that don't have Houston ties see the same things that we do in terms of the Rockets having all this cap space. James Harden can become a free agent. Obviously, the Rockets made it a priority to keep things on good terms with him when he forced his way out. Sam Amick of The Athletic has reported previously that basically the Rockets made it clear to James that the door would be open in the future for a reunion. And this is just basically putting those things together and saying, well, now that we're wrapping up 2022 and about to go into 2023, the calendar year where the Rockets are going to have all this cap space, let's see what happens in Philadelphia. Obviously, if they win the title or get anywhere close, this probably isn't going to come to fruition. But if things don't go that well, sure, this could be an option, not just for the Rockets, but for James as well. And when this went out on Twitter a few days ago, the responses were, I would say, mixed at best. There's a lot of people that still feel jilted over the way Harden forced his way out of town. I've always argued that, honestly, it's not that different than the way most superstars in the modern NBA force their way out of town. This is just the league as it is, and you shouldn't take it personal. These are just the dynamics and how it often plays out. Nonetheless, it's always tougher when it happens to your team, and really it was the first time in this era that we've seen it happen to the Rockets, at least at a level this high. So some people still feel burned about that. Others, of course, they have their qualms over the fact that he's never won a championship. Not going to say it was all low lights, but there were, some playoff games, certainly Game 6 in 2017 against the Spurs, that people were still underwhelmed by, and so they don't have warm, fuzzy feelings about James Harden being the guy when the lights are brightest to help this team. They're also worried about the fact that he'll turn 34 years old next summer, and while he's still an all-star level player, we have seen him have more injuries the last couple of years, and clearly, while still very good, he's an all-star. He's not an MVP level guy the way he was on the Unguardable tour a couple of years back in Houston. That version, I doubt it's coming back. Father Time stops for no one. He's going to be 34 years old next summer, and so some people are concerned about whether that's the right fit to put him with a team that's so young right now, led by Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. So again, reaction mixed, but there's some clear positives as well. The Rockets need a point guard. Kevin Porter Jr., really, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Square peg, round hole. James Harden is one of the best playmakers in the NBA still. His court vision is exquisite, and he has the type of game to where even if some of his scoring, at least the elite attributes of that, age out a bit more quickly, the court vision, the playmaking, those are things that should age more gracefully. And so you could slide him in at point guard, and with his vision, his playmaking, perhaps that helps you develop guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., get them better shots than they're getting right now. And really starting next season when the Rockets are going to be trying to win, because they're not really going to have an incentive to tank anymore with the Thunder most likely owning their draft pick. It is top 4 protected. Then Harden could slide in at a position of clear weakness right now, and one in which really it's not just about what James could provide individually, but it could make life easier for those young prospects who are trying to develop as well. So again, I see the negatives, but that's the positive case. I've got a few thoughts on this, but people know I can be long-winded. So before we get to my side of this, I want to lead off by letting Paolo and James share their perspectives. I know things have been a bit mixed for both of those guys. Paolo, we'll start with you. Where are you at the end of 2022 when it comes to the Harden-Houston possibility?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that Harden has to come here with the right mindset, right? And it's different if Philly wins the championship this year or if they don't, and where James Harden's at, from a mentality standpoint. It's important to realize when he left, he said in his goodbye post on Instagram, and I quote, "I fell short, and for that I am forever indebted. It's far from a goodbye as I pay all my debts." So he clearly opens the door to returning. And depending on who you ask, some people would rather return when he's completely washed as a farewell tour. And there's people who prefer, like, what if James Harden can be your Chris Paul, for example? I completely understand if, as a fan, you don't want James Harden back because you're hurt by the way he left. I think that's completely valid. I personally, I'm not at that stage anymore. I'm kind of over it, but it's completely understanding if you just don't want to support him anymore because of everything that has gone on with him leaving. My counter to that would be, well, him leaving was kind of at the perfect time. If he had pulled the Damian Lillard and stayed around for a couple extra years, he'd be leaving at a time where we wouldn't have our picks, and we'd be tanking straight to the Thunder for. Imagine he was still here and he left the season. We tried to build around him, it didn't work, and he requested a trade this season. Then we'd be truly doomed because the next 3-4 years we're owing picks to the Thunder, and well, that wouldn't be pleasant to be in the mediocrity treadmill for 3 seasons. And then the other point is, a lot of people think of bringing James Harden in as, okay, we're going to, become a contender, or we're bringing in James Harden because we want to win a championship. And one of the arguments against that is, well, James Harden hasn't won a championship, and most people would argue that he's not the best playoff performer, which is valid. What I would say, and I think it's the key to this entire debate, is bringing James Harden in is not about winning a championship within his contract. The way I look at it is, I would love to have him back for 2, maybe 3 years max. And his role being back, we're not going to win a championship within those 3 years. And I think regardless of who you bring, unless it's literally Giannis or Luka, I don't think you're winning a championship or getting close to that within the next 2 to 3 years, which is the contract like I'm discussing. And so him coming would be to transition from being, well, a bottom 3 team in the league, which is what we've been for 3 seasons, into a team that can get into the playoffs. And I don't think you can really dispute that bringing James Harden in basically locks you. James Harden plus, even if you bring James Harden in, you'd still have some cap space left. You could bring in a pick and roll center for him to play with or something like that. And we know how James Harden works. He's not the same guy he used to be, but we have enough talent that I'm fairly certain we'd make the playoffs. That's a big step for a team as bad as we are. Development's not linear. There's no promising that within the next 2 years we will be making the play-in or the playoffs just from talent development alone. I know we're all really confident on these guys, and we often argue that it's way too early to judge on some of them. Well, the truth is, during a rebuild, most of the prospects that you draft don't pan out. And it's way less of a certainty than most people give it credit for. This is not 2K; they don't, naturally increase overall over time. Sometimes guys fall off. Sometimes guys get worse, even as young players. And so, to me, bringing in James Harden is he fits a need, because this is not iso ball James Harden. He still has to some extent, but it's not 30 points a game James Harden. This is a guy that now is slotted back into a role where, with the Sixers, he's averaging 22, 6, and 10. That's 10 assists. We know from when he was here that James Harden has incredible vision. He's an incredible playmaker. And we are a team with the tools to take full advantage of a playmaker as good as Harden is. Jabari Smith Jr. would feast with James Harden, hitting him in his spots. Jalen Green is someone who's been mostly on the ball this season or been more on the ball this season. But we saw last season how good he can be off the ball, just moving and in getting, spoon-fed buckets outside. Most people argue that they wish Jalen Green got more easy shots. And, well, James Harden is someone that's definitely going to bring that. And then again, there's a lot of value to me in next season, especially because we're talking about this, at the end of this season. I think an important caveat to mention is this is all moot if we're in a position to draft Scoot Henderson, because at that point, I think Scoot Henderson would go number 1 overall in like 8, maybe 7 or 8 of the last 10 drafts, and so if he's that good and he is a playmaker and if it's perfect into what you're trying to do, then in that case you go the young route. If we don't do that, then bringing in James Harden makes a lot of sense because you're not presenting into a playoff team. And while that might be a little bit rushed and some of these guys might not be ready for that yet, that experience will be great for the development of these young players. It's important to also mention that look at how well Tyrese Maxey developed ever since James Harden landed in Philadelphia. He was a promising prospect. It wasn't, a lottery pick or anything. I think it was 20th something pick.
Right.
But he looks like a star now. And part of it is talent, part of it is the Phillies development system. But I think part of it's also James Harden. And Tyrese Maxey has gone talked in length about that as well. James Harden has a lot, he's been in the league a long time. He was one of the best scorers of all time in his prime. There are things that Jalen Green can learn from playing with James Harden that aren't dribble. James finishing, how to attack angles, how to recognize when we remember how good James Harden was at recognizing when the defender is just slightly leaning one way, and that's enough for him to get an advantage good enough to collapse the defense. Jalen Green has all the tools in the world right now. He needs that savvy of capitalizing on the advantages that he can very easily create due to his athleticism and his speed. James Harden is someone who can help with that. And I think eventually, if it is a 2-3 year deal, at the end of James Harden's contract, Jalen Green would be 23 years old or 24 years old, and Jabari Smith Jr. would be 22 or 23 years old. That's still very young. And if you imagine a scenario where they're that young and they already have 2 or 3 playoff appearances in their repertoire, that's a promising situation. That's James Harden's not coming off the books. You probably already paid Jalen Green at that point, but you're going to have cap space. This would end the contract either the year of or the year after the big TV deal, even with cap smoothing, that's going to increase cap space. That would, it's important to improve the perception of the franchise around the league. It's very unlikely that the Rockets will get good free agents this year without overpaying because they're a terrible team and players generally want to either go for the money or go for a chance at winning a championship. Right now, the Rockets are the money option. And so bringing in James Harden bridges the gap between being one of the worst teams in the league and being a playoff team with really young players that might look like stars by then. It makes us become a much more attractive free agency destination. And I think bridging that gap has incredible value to a franchise that so far, there's a lot more questions than there are answers when it comes to how many of these guys are going to pan out. And it makes sense from a development standpoint to me. It makes sense from a timeline standpoint to me. If James Harden is coming in to differentiate, don't spend the Brooklyn assets trying to build a team around James Harden. If we're approaching it from this guy's here to bridge us to our perennial contender status eventually down the line, and we stay with our assets, we're not trying to win it all with James Harden, with an older James Harden here, then we'll be in a prime position to acquire a star by the end of this contract with cap space, and we will still have assets from the Brooklyn trade. We will still have young players. In this case, at the very end of the rookie contract, we'll be in a prime position to acquire another star to come play with Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, and whoever we draft next year. And I'm willing to put whatever feelings I have about James Harden, the person, and what he did to get out of Houston, if it means that the team I love, the Rockets, are in one of the, I would think that they would be in one of the best situations in the league ready to make another jump from just a regular playoff team to a natural contender by then. That being said, James, I've gone on for long enough. Me and Ben are both known for going way too long. I know you have some more doubts about bringing in James Harden. We had a back and forth on Twitter, which is also part of what sparked, inviting you on here. I think you usually make some really good points. And yeah, go ahead. How do you feel about a possible James Harden return this season or next offseason?
Yeah, man. As you pointed out, I guess I would say mixed feelings. I'm leaning towards thinking that it probably is a good idea, that the pros likely outweigh the cons. I want to put it this way. It's a macro question that requires some micro analysis, to paraphrase Ben in the intro. So if the question is broadly, do I want James Harden back? And I've met with a two answers, yes or no. I guess I would hit the yes button at the moment, right? But I'd like to look into different circumstances around how it might look, and that's where my answers get varied. So the idea of bringing Harden back and having him lead the youth movement makes a lot of sense from the Rockets' perspective. We don't have our pick in the 2024 draft, well, barring top 4 protection, but I think we're all hoping that we don't fall in that range in 2023-24. So let's just say we don't have the pick. So there's no incentive to lose. So from that perspective, yeah, we might as well draft BPA, assuming it's not Scoot Henderson, and sign James Harden. From Harden's perspective, do we think that he's willing to join the team under the assumption that we're not going to be building a championship contender? Or is it more likely that Harden is going to join with demands, right? So, Paul, I'm going to flip it back to you relatively quickly. What's your stance if Harden says, yeah, I'd like to come back, but I'm going to need you guys to trade, the 4th pick in the 2023 draft and Alperen Şengün and a couple of Brooklyn picks for the best veteran that you can get, because I want to try to pursue the championship. What is your stance in that situation?
At that point, I'm saying no. I think at that point, I'd rather just stick with what we have, hope that these guys develop, perhaps go after some different free agents, even if we're going to have to overpay them, because, yeah, I think that James Harden at 34 years old, he's a good player. He's not the best player on a championship team. And I think the guy that you'd get with the 4th pick, let's say it's the 4th pick, and Alperen Şengün, even if it is, I think you mentioned on Twitter like a Jimmy Butler type. I don't think Jimmy Butler at his age or Harden and the talent we already have wins a championship within the next 2-3 years. And so if it's not good, and the franchise would be destroyed from an asset standpoint at the end of it. So yeah, and I think you pose a valid question. Be very clear with James when sitting at the negotiation table and see where his head's at, because if he's coming here to try and win a championship within the next 2-3 years, which could very well be possible if they don't win it this season, then at that point it's not worth it. It's we're not, most people bring the parallel between Chris Paul in Phoenix and what James Harden would be coming back to Houston. At that point, he's not going to be our Chris Paul in Phoenix because Jalen Green is not Devin Booker yet. Jabari Smith is not DeAndre Ayton or Mikal Bridges yet, and he's probably not going to be that till after next offseason. So if bringing in James Harden means going from tanking to all in, let's win right now, I wouldn't go for it.
Okay, yeah, great. So I agree. Now let me pose a less extreme hypothetical. I think that we probably all agree that Alperen Şengün and James Harden aren't a very logical fit, right? They're just like, Şengün's not the strongest pick and roll finisher. He's more of a low block passing hub. And if Harden's going to be the primary ball handler, we don't really need like a Domantas Sabonis type on the low block. We really need a pick and roll guy. So what if Harden said, I'll come back, but I need you to flip Şengün for Clint Capella and bring Capella back with me? And so we're not destroying our asset base the same way we would for Jimmy Butler, but we're weakening it. Would you accept that situation?
Does it have to be Clint Capella, or can it be can it be a
someone
different
younger and not as big of a cap figure?
Sorry, Ben, could you say that again?
I was saying maybe someone younger, less of a large cap figure could we look at, non-Capella options, i.e. a Capella role without actually being Clint?
Yep. Okay. But let's say that for Harden's sake, he says it has to be one of the strongest pick and roll finishers in the league. And it's a little hard for me to identify a young guy. Maybe you guys might have some ideas. Like, I mean, Time Lord comes to mind, but he's not going to be available, So I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe Onyeka Okongwu out of Atlanta, but he hasn't really looked like a starter to much of an extent. I also like Nerlens Noel in free agency. He'd be a low cost free agency option. Well, let's just say that Harden says I don't want to play with Şengün and leave it at that. And we need to find a pick and roll big. You guys would say that if that pick and roll big is 25 or younger, it's worth it?
I'll go quickly. Okay. To me, yes. I don't think Şengün is at the tier of prospect that you would have him. That keeping him would derail a larger plan. The earlier hypothetical with, in this case, we said the number 4 pick, but basically, as I see it, you've got 3 blue chip prospects, Jalen, Jabari, and whatever you get from 1 to, I guess, 6 or 7 is your floor in next year's lottery. Those are the blue chips. I would not sacrifice any of those for James Harden, who in this hypothetical, James is basically part of a transition phase, as Paolo, you laid out earlier. It's not like James himself is going to be the reason you win a championship or get to even a championship contending level over the next 2 or 3 years. I would not sacrifice any blue chip assets. However, a guy like Şengün, who's a project is probably being a bit too harsh, but to an extent, he's a lottery ticket. If he pans out as significantly above rotation level, not just a rotation player, but someone that's actually like a cornerstone for your future, that's a very high-end outcome. To me, I'm willing to give up. I don't know about like all of them, but I could give up 1 or 2 of those types of players for somebody that, say, a Harden thinks is a better fit. If it's just that and it's not the lottery pick, then I'm more open to it.
Yeah, I think I'm with Ben. It depends on who the guy is, right? If he is young enough to the point, and I'll set the bar at 26. If he's young enough to the point of, okay, he's here for this 2-3 years of Harden, but he still will likely fit into whatever we're trying, because the pick and roll big fits basically into any system unless you have an on-shooting guard, lead guard. So knowing that, and if he's young enough to be a part of what we're doing with James Harden now, and can be a part of what we'd be doing afterwards. So names that pop into mind that I would have to think about. I'm not firing off the hot take just yet, but if for some reason, probably Jared Allen or DeAndre Ayton or, Robert Time Lord, like you said, if it's one of those guys, maybe even Mitchell Robinson with the Knicks, perhaps, maybe. If it were like one of those situations when it's a guy that perhaps maybe John Collins, I don't think he can play center, but he's the type of age and fit into basically any system while being a lob threat. If it's that type of thing, yes, I would still do it. And it's not because I hate Şengün or anything like that, but it's mostly because I have my own doubts that at how Şengün would fit into a winning type basketball team because of how unique he is as a prospect and because how rare it is that we see one of the top teams in the league have that type of player unless it's like Jokic. And so I think Şengün is a great prospect, and I don't think they should trade them. But if the upside is bringing James Harden in and transforming this team into a playoff team and giving that experience to everybody else, including the guy that we're bringing in for Şengün, then I would probably still do it, assuming length of contract is 2-3 years.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really like the names Ayton and Robinson. I know Robinson is a little bit of an inconsistent player with some flaws, but I mean at the same time he's a really strong rim protector and he's only 25. I think it would be a good fit. Paulo, you know well that I share those concerns about Şengün. I love the kid. He's so talented, but he doesn't look to me like he really has the upside to ever be a good defensive big. And I just fundamentally believe that a defensive big is really important to contention. Let me throw another hypothetical. I think all 3 of us agree that if we were to draft Scoot Henderson, Harden's out, right?
Right.
What about Eamon Thompson? Because in my mind, Eamon, he doesn't look like a particularly strong shooter. He's an extremely dynamic playmaker. I think he needs to be developed as a primary ball handler, and I don't think you can really do that with Harden on the roster. And I don't think Eamon is likely to really complement Harden in any way. So would you guys extend the same caveat to Eamon Thompson?
I personally wouldn't. I would with Scoot simply because he's the type of transcendent prospect. I think Paolo said, and from everything that I've looked into, I would agree that probably 7 or 8 out of the last 10 drafts, Scoot goes number 1 overall. It's just he's the likely to this year because Wemby is such an absolute freak. Scoot is the type of transcendent prospect that I'm willing to say, you know what, even if this guy clearly helps me in a number of areas, then I can't do anything that's going to block or limit Scoot Henderson. I don't think Thompson is quite at that level. I think, certainly if you look at it strictly as Thompson versus Harden, you could make the argument. But for me, when I look at not just Harden, but what he would mean for the development of Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, who both have considerable potential off the ball, I would say no. To me, unless it's clearly a transcendent guy like Scoot, even if it's a very good prospect like Thompson, I don't think I would let that dictate my decision on Harden because of not just what Harden brings himself, but what he could bring for your other blue chip prospects that are already here.
Yeah, that's a fun hypothetical. I'm actually going to disagree with Ben with a caveat as well. I'm going to say draft Scoot Henderson and not Scoot Henderson, draft Eamon Thompson and don't sign Harden if you can bring in Miles Turner. Because bringing in Miles Turner eases a lot of my concerns about Eamon Thompson's jump shot, because at that point he'd be the only non-shooter on the floor, and he'd be involved in most of the action, in the pick and roll, right? I think you can only have one non-shooter, and that non-shooter has to be involved into whatever action you're running most of the time. Otherwise, we'll see situations like Russell Westbrook in Houston, whenever anybody else has the ball. And so I think Eamon Thompson has generational athleticism, generational size. His defense has the potential to be a defensive player of the year type player as a card. His playmaking is very natural. I'm not the highest guy on Eamon Thompson because of that jump shot, because of the doubts with the jump shot. But I've been talked into, and I've watched some more, and I think he has stuff that's just really special when it comes to feel and everything else. So if you can bring in Miles Turner, which eases the biggest draft concern with Eamon Thompson, which is the shooting, and for context, Miles Turner is a free agent next year, then I would still do it because I think you're going somewhere if your lineup is Eamon Thompson, Jalen Green, KPJ, or Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, and Miles Turner. I think that's a great defensive team. Miles Turner is one of the best defensive bigs in the league, best rim protectors in the league. Jabari Smith, we know how good he is. The small forward being, if it's Tari Eason or KJ Martin, a good defender as well. Jalen Green is good on the ball, depends on the night that he's having, but he has the tools to be a good defender. And then Eamon Thompson is an incredible defender. So the only doubt you have is Jalen Green. And I'm fairly comfortable with Jalen Green being my doubt defensively, because I think he has the potential to be a good defender at some point in his career. That being said, if I'm assuming Eamon Thompson's clear number 3, right? So if we have the 3rd pick and we're not confident, you draft Eamon Thompson anyways because you can trade him later. But if you can't get Miles Turner, then I would still go after James Harden, because Miles Turner is very unique in being a rim protecting big that can shoot threes really well or is elite at both things and has been this season, even though early in his career he hasn't. If you can't get Miles Turner, I'm likely trading down from Eamon Thompson because I think he's at this point, if you ask most people, kind of in a tier of his own after Scoot and Wemby. I would trade down, draft, I'll start Thompson, have him play the small forward, bring in James Harden, and if it's required by his contract, still trade Şengün for a pick and roll big. And I think you're in good shape with Harden, Jalen, I'll start Thompson, Jabari Smith, and whatever big you bring in.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of bleeds into my last hypothetical that I want to pose. Does Harden impact your draft strategy at all? For example, and I think I know the answer, but just to pose it. For example, say you have the 5th overall pick, right? Or say you have this 5th overall pick. Cam Whitmore's off the board. Nick Smith's off the board, right? So effectively, you're probably choosing between Ozard Thompson and Brandon Miller. I personally think that Thompson has a much higher ceiling. I think he's a much better prospect for a number of reasons. But Brandon Miller would be a better fit alongside Harden because he's more advanced as a shooter right now. You take Thompson, right?
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think you can let Harden dictate, especially because, the last couple of years have been a reminder of just how slow the developmental process is for a lot of these high picks. I mean, you look at, I don't want to say the struggles, but clearly the inconsistency with Jalen and Jabari. I mean, this is a process even for the true blue chip guys that takes 3-4 years. And as Paolo said earlier, you're going into this Harden reunion, if it were to happen, and this is all a hypothetical, looking at this basically being like a 2 to 3 year transition. Harden's probably not the guy, or if he is, on the roster by the time you're actually trying to contend, he's going to be a shell of what he is now in all likelihood. So I don't think you make a decision with a draft pick that has, years of, potentially 10, 15 years of upside based on the first 2 to 3 years of this Harden transition period. I think with an asset that's that elite, talking about a top 5 pick and a pretty strong draft, there's no way that you can consider a 34-year-old James Harden and weight it that heavily in terms of what you do with that pick.
Yeah, I think to sum it up in one sentence, right? To me, bringing James Harden in is bring him in if he's not affecting basically, or if he's affecting very little else other than just him coming in. The plan is still the same. James Harden is coming in for me as a boost in development because of how smart he is, because of what he can, teach younger players, and because he's not going to carry us, but he plus the talent we have, I think, is surefire a playoff team or a playing team. And I think that bringing James Harden in is basically buying more development, is what I'm looking at it as. And not only from what he teaches from getting to the playoffs, because if you're not going to get Amen or Scoot, you're not going to get a natural playmaker in this draft, I don't think. Unless someone, makes a huge leap. I don't think you're getting a lead ball handler in this draft. And so bringing in someone like James, who is very unique in this free agency class, brings functionality to your team. Right now, there's very little functionality to the team, and you need functionality to develop. And James Harden also brings that. So I said it was one sentence. It's been some more sentences than that, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, I don't really see a potential Harden pursuit being that correlated with your draft. I could see it with Şengün simply because of the combination of playing style, as James was laying out, and the fact that he's not really a blue chip prospect anyway. But this hypothetical, at least in my mind, it's all around the idea that James at this point, and he may not want this, but again, we're just talking, dot connecting, as Tim McMahon put it. Maybe after the way the last 2 years have gone, we know how south it went in Brooklyn, how quickly it went in that direction. We don't know how things are going to play out in Philadelphia, but let's say hypothetically they lose in the first round, and it's a classic situation where maybe he realizes the grass isn't greener on the other side, that there's downsides to this mercenary path as well, and maybe he just wants to go back to where he's comfortable, and maybe he wants to do what his former teammate Chris Paul did in 2019 and 2020. It was 2020, not 2019, because of course the season in between he played in Oklahoma City, and we all know how that went, basically reestablishing his value. But yeah, he can find more value trying to lift a younger team to that next level, as opposed to just outright chasing a championship, going from contender to contender and trying to find I guess, the perfect complement of co-stars and role players. Maybe James just realizes that this is too hard. There's too much stress that comes with that. And he'd just rather go back to when he was at his best in the environment that made him happiest on a personal level and just let the chips fall as they may. Again, I think the fact that he's watched Chris Paul really after James, according to so many reports, came to the conclusion that Chris, might be washed after that 2018 to 2019 season, have so much success with quasi rebuilding situations. Maybe that sparks something in James in terms of what he wants to do with his career when he's at those ages. And again, he'll turn 34 years old next summer. So for me, it's built around that hypothetical. If, as James was saying earlier, or James, that is, that Harden wants something along the lines of a co-star or a big three in Houston and radically transforming your roster to basically give up some of your true blue chip prospects to bring in more players that are ready-made of Harden's, I guess, stature in the NBA and his current veteran status. To me, the clear answer is no. The Rockets have enough of these blue chip talents that it's just not worth that. When even if you do those things, I don't think you're at the front of the list in terms of championship contenders anyway. There's just so far to go. So again, this is just a thought exercise around the idea that Harden is amenable to being what Chris Paul was in Oklahoma City and at the beginning of his Phoenix tenure. I know the Suns are what they are now, but a lot of people, when Chris went there in November 2020, it wasn't like people said, oh, that's a ready-made contender. No, things just sort of escalated more quickly than people thought, and we've seen the product the last couple of years. So I'm going on the thought exercise that James is open to that. If it's anything more than that, to where he's wanting to radically transform this young core that's in place, at least the blue chip elements of it, I would definitely say no. But I think, again, this is just all hypothetical. And for me, assuming he's willing to basically add on, then yeah, I'm open to it because I don't think, again, that it's going to radically transform the true blue chips that you have in place. And at least with Jalen and Jabari, I would make the argument that James would really accentuate them in a positive way and bring out elements of their game that we haven't seen nearly enough to this point with Stephen Silas as head coach and Kevin Porter Jr. as your point guard. The other part of this discussion would be Harden compared to other options with the cap space in terms of what else you could do in free agency trades, whatever it may be, as opposed to giving Harden a max deal. We can quibble over exactly how many years, but the bottom line, he's going to get well over $40 million a year. And that number, really, it makes a lot of people queasy. Now, of course, salaries are exploding in the NBA, so it's not what it used to be. But it is a very large figure. And when it comes to, should you add on with Harden or should you go with other paths, I understand the other arguments. I'm not going to say there's no validity to any of them, but I think in general, a lot of the more veteran angles are overplayed. And that's what I want to steer our discussion with for, I guess, the back half of this podcast is comparing Harden not just to the draft options and the guys you have in place, but also other external options, what you could do with that money. And for me, a good place to start with this discussion, I think a lot of people, especially the more casual fans, there can be a misunderstanding at times of what NBA free agency actually is. This is not Major League Baseball where guys like Aaron Judge and Carlos Correa hit the market. It's a very different landscape because the NBA caps the max salaries. You can only get 4 years, rare exceptions 5 years. It's not like baseball where Aaron Judge can be the best player in the game, won MVP, and he's still incentivized to hit free agency, even playing for a huge market in the Yankees, because of course he can get 9 years, $350 million, whatever the final terms ended up being. And the Yankees probably aren't going to bid against themselves for that level of, extreme contract, paying him until he's roughly 40 years old. So even though Judge was always likely to stay, he's incentivized by the system to go out and basically take himself to the market, drive up a bidding war, and put some pressure, even if he wants to stay, for the Yankees to make that type of bid. That's not the way it works in the NBA. True star level players rarely reach free agency because, quite frankly, the legit stars, the guys that are better than James Harden in terms of their impact, and Harden's still very good, 20 points, 10 assists per game, one of the best playmakers. He's not a top 10 player anymore, but the guys that truly are, and especially those that are younger, they never actually make it to free agency. if they are going to be on the market, honestly, it's via trade, and it's about a year or two before they become a free agent, the same way we saw James in Houston a couple of years ago, because the consequences of them leaving for no compensation are just dire. Look at post-Cleveland LeBron in 2010, the first time he left. It's absolutely brutal. Nobody wants to go down that route. And because the players, with the NBA's salary cap and the structure, these true max level players are always underpaid. There's no financial incentive for them to wait. They can get what they want in an extension offer. It's just a matter of whether they're content in their situation. And if they're not, they're going to hit the market earlier, the trade market, that is, and force a resolution, because of course they know they're going to get the same money either way, so they'd rather get it earlier as opposed to wait, and who knows what happens with an injury, regression, any other crazy thing that could conceivably happen. They're going to want to lock themselves in. So I think some people, especially the more casuals, don't seem to get that a lot of the truly transcendent talents that are clearly better than Harden in terms of impact or age, they're not going to make it to free agency anyway. A lot of people look at $60 million in cap space and they're turned on just by the abstract nature of how that sounds. And they say, well, we've got $60 million. Look at these superstars. Look at what, you can fit theoretically Luka or Giannis or Nikola Jokic. In just financial terms, they see what they could theoretically do. In terms of actual practice, that's not how it works. The big names don't get to the market. The odds are you're going to have to overpay, because the types of guys who actually make it to true unrestricted free agency, they're good players, but they're flawed in some way. Or in the case of James Harden, there's concerns over the age and how many years you want to give them. So I think some of the arguments against, there's just this idea from some of the more casual fans that there's a utopia, that you have this money, you can just get the perfect fit in the perfect age alignment and just add on to the team you have in place. And again, based on the NBA structure, that's just not how it works. The situations with the truly transcendent guys get resolved before they're unrestricted free agents, and you have to go the trade market for that. So in my opinion, this situation with the cap space, it's not like you have the alternatives that a lot of people, I think, have sort of come up with in their minds. This cap space, it is a tool to improve your team, but it's not a tool that's going to get you, in all likelihood, a transcendent difference maker within a year or two of you having that space. You're probably going to have to overpay someone, because that's just how free agency works. You have to, because you're adding on without subtracting, because you're adding on and other teams with cap space look at it the same way, you're not having to send out assets, be it players, future draft capital, whatever it may be. You can have a bidding war. And teams are willing to pay a bit more than maybe a player is worth, because it's like, well, I could be overpaying them. This is how a general manager may be looking at it. I might overpay them a little bit, but I can bring them in without losing any of my future draft capital for other trades in the future, or taking away from my current team. So again, is Harden going to be theoretically overpaid by the back end of the contract he signs next summer, assuming he opts out? Probably, but a lot of these guys are going to be overpaid. That's just the way free agency works. So I know I've been a bit long-winded there, but I just wanted to explain just at a very high level why I think some people have sort of a misguided notion when it comes to free agency. Again, it's not as if you can reasonably expect to get, true difference makers and perfect age alignment with your core on good contracts. That's just rarely how it works in unrestricted free agents. The odds are you're going in unrestricted free agency to overpay somebody or multiple players. That's just the way that it works. Now, in terms of the Rockets situation with those disclaimers, I see three alternative paths to pursuing James Harden, but to me, they all have flaws. Not saying that they're just terrible plans, but I don't think any of them are foolproof to where you say this is clearly better. The three phases, as I see it, and again, the disclaimer going in, we understand that Harden, he's not going to elevate you to a contending level simply by himself. This is a transition phase. So we're all talking about how do you get from where they are now to eventually do a championship level. And if Harden's not going to do that by himself, and I think we can all agree he's not, then yeah, it's fair to say, are we sure that this is the right path? And there's some valid arguments for these others. But in my opinion, I don't think any of them are all that compelling. The first of the three would be the hardliner plan. What I mean by the hardliner plan is be super conservative with your money. if it's not the guy that's going to take you to that next level or a super value contract, then basically roll over the space for future trades, for future free agency periods. If you're Rafael Stone, be very, very cautious with your spending. And instead of really bringing in almost anybody to multi-year deals, if it doesn't work out with the true top of the food chains, then maybe just go after some 1-year reclamation projects, guys willing to sign basically a bloated 1-year prove it deal. Maybe you can flip them at the deadline. Of course, you wouldn't have their bird rights in this scenario, so they wouldn't be long-term fixtures. But regardless, the idea is not to really clog your books at all and just roll over this cap space until you're able to use it on the type of difference maker that's going to take you to that next level. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this because number one, it's rare for those types of players to hit unrestricted free agency anyway. Number two, if the Rockets don't take the next step as an organization, they're probably not going to be attractive enough to lure that guy in the first place anyway. And then the other point that I would throw out is that strategy often accompanies tanking, because when you take that hardline scenario of, you know what, unless it's a perfect deal, I'm not going to disrupt this cap space, I'm just going to stay super flexible, then you sort of know when you're going after 1-year reclamation projects that either may bust or you're going to trade them at the deadline because you're not going to have the bird rights to retain them, then you're probably going to lose a lot of games. And so the reason teams might go down that path is because, well, we know we're probably going to boost our draft odds, whereas the Rockets owing all that draft capital to OKC starting next season, that doesn't really make sense for them. So again, to me, the hardliner plan doesn't make sense for the Rockets. They need to spend some or all of this money. One of the other plans is what I call the medium plan. Instead of going after one big fish like James Harden, why don't you go after 2 players and say $20 million a year range, try and get some, if not friendly contracts, something that you can at least work with. And one of the big arguments for this is that you have more tradable salary, in that Harden, if things don't work out with James for one reason or another, he would sort of be like Russell Westbrook and John Wall the last couple of years. It's very hard to trade players at that salary simply because the vast majority of teams don't have the amount of dispensable salaries to make the math work in a deal. So you're sort of stuck with that player, as opposed to the other guys. Even if it's not the right fit, then it's easier to theoretically move them or use them in salaries for further upgrades down the line. Maybe, as we talked about earlier, a lot of the true difference makers don't make it to free agency. Well, if, I might throw out a hypothetical. Somebody mentioned DeAndre Ayton earlier. If things continue to unravel for the Suns and they just gradually age out, what if Devin Booker gets closer to free agency and there's a path to get him? Then you're going to have to make the salary math work. And maybe that's the way you can get a player that's closer to age alignment with your core, that can be that piece to help take you to the next level. Again, just throwing him out as a hypothetical. And some will say, well, Harden would be basically untradeable in those scenarios, so why don't you look for 2 younger guys who might be more tradable? My counter to that is that Rafael Stone has already done a pretty good job of building back the tradable salary. The Kevin Porter Jr. contract, it's basically the way it's structured. He's like a $16 million expiring every year. There's a 1-year window, I guess, if they choose in 2024, and we'll see how he pans out, or they'd have to guarantee 2 years. So there's a brief window in which he'd have, 2 years left rather than 1. But for the most part, it's a very short-term contract at a fair value that's significant enough to use in trades. Jayshawn Tate is on about $7 million a year, and it's a very team-friendly deal. We know they're interested in doing the same thing with KJ Martin, and maybe by the deadline this year, you have KJ at, $10, $12 million a year. And so between them, you already have tradable salary. And when I say tradable salary, I mean guys that, are potentially useful around the league, short-term contracts that, aren't going to be seen as negative when it comes to trade matching, but, they're not indispensable to your team in Houston. You can trade them without it dramatically altering your future. And I think everybody would agree, guys like KPJ, KJ Martin, Jayshawn Tate, none are star level players. So you can easily, if a star comes available, like this Devin Booker hypothetical, you can offload them without dramatically altering your calculus. You're not moving a guy like Jalen, Jabari, or the lottery pick that you get next year. So in terms of the 2 medium-sized salaries rather than 1 big, I would argue that it's not as necessary to begin with, simply because the Rockets do have more tradable salary than people think. It's not all available yet because, of course, KPJ just signed that deal. But I think going forward in the next couple of years, it's not like they're devoid of talent. A lot of people have made out I've talked a lot this year about the fact that the Rockets lost Eric Gordon and Christian Wood, so it's harder to make the math work on a lot of deals. That's true this year, but in terms of the next couple of years, again, you've got KPJ, you've got Tate. I think there's a good chance you're going to have KJ as well. So you are going to have some intriguing pieces on short-term contracts at reasonable numbers to where Rafael Stone does have money to play with, so that even if you don't get that big fish in free agency next summer, and it starts to seem more likely that big fish is going to have to come via trade, well, you can still potentially do that. So for me, that's why the two medium salaries doesn't really have a ton of appeal. And the Rockets already have a roster crunch as it is. The NBA is a league where quality typically trumps quantity. 4 quarters does not equal $1, to use the Bill Simmons phrase. Obviously, top end talent wins, and I think that's especially the case with the Rockets as they're currently constructed with how deep things are. So that's why the medium salary plan doesn't work. And then the final plan, I would say, of the 3 Harden alternatives, there's the hardliner plan, there's the 2 medium salaries, and then there's the take on a bad contract for assets. We've seen people talking about, well, what if you could take on, Duncan Robinson from the Heat, a contract like that, and get, a future unprotected pick, which would, bolster your trade stockpile. My response to that is maybe, but I honestly don't see that as all that appealing either, because you already have a lot of those types of picks from Brooklyn. You already do have, not want to say just a loaded war chest when it comes to your future picks, but you have, enough, especially when compared with, and to circle back to McMahon's comments, this is not OKC, Salt Lake City, or San Antonio. This is Houston, a potentially desirable market for free agents. You don't have to have the type of war chest that makes an opposing GM say, you know what, I've got to do this deal with Houston because the offer is so overwhelming. No, you've just got to have a respectable enough offer to where other teams say, you know what, because the player is open to going there, then I'll deal with the Rockets simply because it's good enough that I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make this player and or his agent really upset. You just need enough. And I think the Rockets already have enough with the war chest they have of unprotected picks and swaps from Brooklyn. And when we talk about, taking on a bad contract, it's important to remember that those are speculative bets. If you take on Duncan Robinson, or like the last couple of years, all these, would you take on Russell Westbrook if you got a future first from the Lakers? You're making a speculative bet, that 5-7 years down the line, maybe the Lakers or Heat aren't that good. There's also a world where, you look at their destinations, the markets they play in, where they find a way to still be relevant, and that pick isn't that good. So I don't think it's honestly all that valuable. If you could take on a bad contract and get, a pick that you feel very confident is going to be a lottery pick, then okay, sure, I get that. That would be more appealing than Harden to me. I just don't think that that's all that realistic, because most of the teams that are trying to offload bad contracts are teams that are contending now. So we're talking about 5-7 years down the line, which isn't going to really help you in the short term, at least in terms of that draft pick itself, because again, we're talking probably 10 years by the time you not only that pick is made and the player gets even remotely close to his peak, not even fitting with this group and what they're trying to do. I think the Rockets would look at something like that as more of a trade asset, what they could do with that pick and the liquidity of it on the market. And again, it would be sort of speculative, saying, well, we hope that maybe, the contender of choice, the Lakers, the Heat, whatever it may be, think about what this theoretically could be. I just think that they already have a lot of those with the assets they have from Brooklyn. And so while I'm not going to say that there's no appeal to it, I don't think the appeal is so overwhelming that you say, you know what, I'm clearly going to do this over James Harden. To me, it's a speculative bet. And given the Rockets' current state and the other factors, it's not a terrible plan. It's just not one that makes me so comfortable that I say, you know what, this is clearly the way. Even if I can upgrade my team in the short term with James Harden, this is far superior. To me, those other 3 paths, we can talk hypothetically, and, if you squint hard enough in these scenarios, see some paths to where it works out. But I don't know. For me, they all have at least some flaws to the point where, at least where I'm sitting, I don't think any of them clearly outweigh the upside of bringing in a legit playmaker like James Harden that, as the point guard of your team, can make things so much better in the short term for the guys that you're actually trying to develop. I agree that Harden's just a transition phase. He's not the guy who in and of itself is going to be that alpha, that engine that's going to bring you to a contending level. You're still going to need to bring that in some other capacity, be it, one of your own guys develops into that. Maybe it's a future trade. But again, I just think that, if you can bring in Harden without really disrupting those internal prospects that you have, and in my opinion, you would still be a trade player between, again, the matching salaries you have in place and the future unprotected assets you have coming in from Brooklyn. I just don't see any of those other arguments being especially compelling. Am I missing anything? Paolo, we can start with you.
I think you made some really good points as you went along. To answer your hardline point, I think you called it that, where you delay the cap space, either by 1+1 deals or by, just not signing anyone, or taking on expiring contracts if anybody's looking to dump them. There's one guy next year that's guaranteed to be there. That is the exception to the rule of guys will take the max extension, which is Jaylen Brown, who can't get a max extension because his first rookie extension wasn't the max. And so the Celtics can't offer him a max off of this extension. So he will guaranteed hit free agency next year. So he's a guy that most people would consider tempting. The counter to that is, well, everybody's going to want him. What makes the Rockets special to the point that they'll get the best free agent out there? And this ties into answers to the other two options as well. Free agency is very limited. Whatever guys you look and pinpoint as targets, there is Detroit and there is Orlando with massive cap space looking for the exact same opportunities. And besides those teams in the same circumstances as we are, there's all the other contenders in the league. And so you're also betting against those players, just going to them for less money to try and win a championship. The free agency pool is so limited nowadays that you're competing with everybody. And so there's no guarantee that teams will pick the Rockets. Part of the appeal of bringing James Harden in is the fact that he will make us more appealing down the line by making us a playoff team for 2-3 years. Taking on contracts, like you said, Orlando and Detroit will be looking, and OKC as well, will be looking to take contracts into cap space for assets, which means that the compensation you'll get for taking on those contracts will be less because there will be, the more it's a supply and demand type of thing. And then the other thing that you mentioned, or the one thing that I wanted to mention is James Harden is also appealing because there's no, if he wants to come here, it's a very specific scenario. And for that scenario, only the Rockets make sense. He's not going to go do this to the Magic or to Detroit, especially not Detroit since they have Kate Cunningham, or to OKC since they have Shea. The thing about James Harden is, well, we are his opportunity to do this if this is what he wants to do. And we're not competing with a bunch of teams to try and sign him. The teams that have cap space are not contending, so they can't offer that. And the other teams that have cap space are rebuilding. And within rebuilding teams, I'm fairly certain he'd pick us basically every single time. And so that's another one of the pluses. I think whoever you sign is likely going to be overpaid. And I think there are guys that are worth overpaying for because they're very unique archetypes. I think Miles Turner is one of those guys. But as I said, I think Miles Turner is one of those guys. I'm sure Orlando, OKC, Detroit, all of these teams think the exact same thing. And there will be a market. The Pacers will try to bring him back as well. Look how good he's doing with their young core over there. So I think people point out Fred VanVleet. Okay, you'd have to overpay him, pay him close to near max money if you want to bring him on because, well, he is in a situation with the Raptors where he is their starting point guard, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. They don't have anybody coming down the pipeline to replace him, and they are, more competitive than the Rockets are, even if you don't consider them contenders. And so, cap space, as you said, is way better as a concept than it is in reality. And you can't, cap space is not like having a certain amount of money and going grocery shopping and you go to the store and you pick out what you want. Free agency is not like that. It's actually just like an auction. You have that money, that limited money, and you go to the auction and you've got to pay more than what everybody else is paying. add that the fact that we are the worst team in the league, and well, we're it's basically like we're paying an extra tax on our auction bids. So that's something that boosts, I guess, the argument for trading for James Harden. I don't know how James feels, but yeah.
Yeah. So Paul, you just touched on something that I wanted to touch on, but I'll just add to it. A lot of people seem to like the Fred VanVleet auction. I personally strongly dislike that auction. Mainly because we are one of the three worst teams in the league, and so yeah, I suspect that to persuade Fred VanVleet to sign with the Rockets this offseason, we'd have to offer him upwards to $40 million a season. And frankly, I don't think he's quite worth $30 million a season. He's a good player. I think he's a kind of a commitment to mid. I don't see how that really furthers our bottom line. I guess another possible free agent target would be Mike Conley. He's a free agent this summer, but I mean, at his age, as a small guard, he's having another pretty good season in Utah. But I think he's a candidate to fall all the way off like any season now, right? And honestly, probably next season. So I'm not really a huge fan of that option either. I would identify one possible ulterior route, which we kind of talked about before we started recording. It's a route that requires a lot of caveats to fall into place at the same time. But if the Charlotte Hornets end up with the second, or in my opinion, even third pick in the draft, well, I'll start with the second pick. If they're in a position to draft Scoot Henderson, I think they would almost have to put LaMelo Ball in the trade market. There are already whispers that Ball is not that satisfied in Charlotte. And if they're drafting Scoot Henderson, I don't think their route forward is to try to convert Ball into like some kind of a hybrid guard. He's a point guard. He should have the ball in his hands. And Scoot definitely is the same way. So I think they would start looking at trading Ball. And even in a hypothetical situation where the Hornets had the third pick, where Amen Thompson, who in my opinion is very much a point guard and is very much a lock at that draft spot, is available. Let's say the Rockets had the fifth or sixth pick. If I'm the Hornets, I'm thinking there's a lot of appeal in drafting both Thompson twins and additionally adding a lot of assets for Ball. So I would probably still trade Ball if I were them in that scenario. So that's the one route that I would identify that requires a lot of contingencies to fall into place all at the same time, is trading for LaMelo Ball. I personally would be willing to give up like the 4th through 7th pick in this draft, Şengün, and maybe 3 Brooklyn picks to bring in LaMelo Ball. Maybe I'm crazy. I love the kid. He's playing like a superstar since he came back this season. I really think he's a top tier talent in the league. I'm curious where you guys stand on that. But otherwise, I would prefer Harden to any of the 3 alternatives that Ben pointed out for sure.
Yeah, I'd be in for that for sure. I mean, if you can get a true difference maker, it's so hard. Again, the reason I outlined those scenarios is all under the hypothetical that the Rockets aren't going to be able to get a LaMelo Ball type player a year from now. If you can, and of course his role would definitely overlap a lot with James Harden, then yeah, you move heaven and earth in terms of your future assets to get him. That's the kind of guy, if you can get LaMelo without touching Jalen, Jabari, and the lottery pick next year, you do it and run. I would not hesitate at including basically anything else, because if you could theoretically have a core of your 3 high lotto picks plus LaMelo, that's wild. That's absolutely incredible.
Ben, sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I am assuming in this hypothetical that we're including our 2023.
Oh, the 2023. Okay,
yeah.
I'll still do it.
Yeah, I might,
unless it's 1 or 2, of course.
Yeah, but yeah, I wouldn't do it for Wemby. I mean, we're doing this hypothetical where Charlotte is at 2 and they're getting Scoot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so basically it's only if you have, I guess to put it that way, yeah, unless you're at 1 and you get Wemby, and obviously that's, you're keeping Wemby, then yeah, I mean, I guess you could talk me into even including the 2023. Yeah. He's just that transcendent of a talent. I mean, that's why, he's the player. if you draft one of the Thompson twins, for example, you're hoping that he has a LaMelo Ball type impact. Like that's the upside scenario. And in
Yeah,
this case,
and
you're getting a guy who already is.
even James Harden himself. I mean, what we want out of James Harden in his signing, LaMelo Ball already brings, which is the playmaking. Making other guys around him, making the game easier for other guys around him. There's severe defensive concerns with LaMelo, but he has a size, he has a foot speed. It's just about getting him to commit to playing defense. And well, James Harden's not some defensive god himself, and we have the advantage of being like we can afford bringing a guy like that on because Jalen Green is, as a shooting guard, is a guy that can easily guard point guards, and so you can easily put Jalen on the point guard, which is usually the quicker player, with James Harden or with LaMelo Ball, and put them on twos, who are usually easier to guard for guys like that. The other thing I wanted to bring up are two things quick. First one is the scenario that James brings up. The good thing about it is we'll know before we get a chance to sign James, right? Because the draft lottery is before free agency and the draft itself is before free agency. So one of the good things is we can go through the draft before we make the decision on James, which is a blessing here. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of steer the conversation towards is I think another one of the positives of this is we know Kevin Porter Jr. Looks up to James Harden, and he's not, a key part of the rebuild, but it has the little added bonus that James Harden would be one of the players that he'd be, I would bet, fairly happy coming off the bench for, and he could learn from him as well. And so we know how in rebuild sometimes things fall into the right place, or a team isn't ready to make a decision. I'm not sure if the Rockets would be ready to bench KPJ, but if James Harden comes in, it kind of forces them to, and it might, it might be one of those decisions that is forced to happen that probably should happen regardless. So it might be an added bonus to KPJ if we bring James Harden in, that will finally try him as a sixth man and a guard rotation where, I think it's very appealing if you're imagine you draft Al-Star Thompson with the 4th, 5th pick. Having Harden, Jalen, Thompson, Jabari, and whatever pick and roll big that we got, and then KPJ running the second unit with some of the guys that we already have, it's very appealing because as I said, not only does it help the starting lineup, we're also finally getting KPJ to play a role that I think he'd strive in, and we might also increase his value as an asset by playing him in a role that suits him better.
Yeah, I strongly agree. To be completely honest, and at the risk of coming across as a hater, I guess, I think there are two major fundamental holes on this team. I think that the lack of rim protection is one of them, but I think the even bigger one, to be completely honest, is the utter lack of like a primary playmaker. Right. I just don't believe that Kevin Porter Jr. is that guy. To be completely honest, if we were to draft Victor Wembanyama and we still have Kevin Porter Jr. running point next year, I have very serious concerns about where the organization's headed. I just don't think it's viable, and it's time to move on from it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not that worried about it in the macro because, again, I think the contract for KPJ is so favorable that you could easily, transition him to a sixth man or a wing role and bring in someone else in the scenario where you get Wemby. We've been talking about James Harden this entire podcast, and he could be that guy. But of course, there's other alternatives as well. I know there's limits. Mike Conley's a guy I've thought about, but you're right with his archetype. There's a world where he falls off very, very quickly. But the point is, you're going to have this money to go out and address that problem. They haven't had the money before. They also haven't had the incentive to win. So in my opinion, the KPJ stuff is, largely an experimental trial. I don't think it's something that they're married to long term. Quite frankly, I'd be stunned if KPJ is the point guard next season. I just, for a lot of reasons, do not see it happening. And so one way or another, I think it's going to be addressed. I think free agency is the likely route, and they use, be it for the free agent market or trades, using their advantaged financial position, they'll address it in one way. But yeah, you're right. I would say the playmaking and the lack of rim protection, those are the two glaring fundamental flaws that you've got to address in some way.
Yeah, just a quick thing about Mike Conley himself. He could be a free agent, right? But he does have 14.3 million guaranteed next year, so it will be up to the Jazz to be willing to take that hit.
Yeah, good point.
I did not realize that actually. I thought he was completely an unrestricted free agent. So
No,
that's interesting.
Yeah, he might still hit free agency though, because I mean, if you're the Jazz, you can save like he's making 24 million a year, so you can still save 10 million by waiving him. So he might still hit free agency. It's just, it's kind of iffy right now. And regardless, Mike Conley as a concept, a younger Mike Conley makes sense, and he is averaging 7.5 assists to 1.5 turnovers this year. But he's also shooting 38, 35, 70 splits down across the board from his entire career. So he's 35. Age is definitely catching up to him, and that's part of the incentive with Harden, as y'all said. Most of the point guards or lead playmakers on the market have severe red flags to them, like James has, but to a lesser extent.
All right, well, I think that's everything that was on my agenda for today. And of course, we've gone on a bit longer than we normally do, but when the subject is a James Harden reunion, that's naturally going to happen. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that either of you guys want to throw out there before we close out?
Nope, I'm quite satisfied. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a great conversation. I've said everything I thought to say coming in.
Paolo, going once, going twice?
Two things. Manifesting if we do get Wemby and we do get Harden, manifesting the Harden, Jalen, I don't know, KJ Martin, Jabari Smith, Wembanyama, where you no longer have to trade for a pick and roll big, because even though Wemby isn't, prototypical one, he can do the job. And
right.
And the other thing I was going to say is, hey, this is our last pod before Christmas, so Merry Christmas to those who celebrate.
Yep, absolutely. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all of our listeners. Thank you all so much. With that, we will wind down. For James and Paolo, I'm Ben. If you want commentary in the interim before our next episode, the best place to get that, of course, is on Twitter. You can follow me on there at Ben Dubose, Paolo on there at Paolo Alves NBA, and James on there at James Piercy11. You can also follow the show, The Logger Line, on Twitter at The Logger Line, where you can also find our link tree, and that's where you can find it. Well, obviously the platforms where you can listen to this program, but also links to our sponsors, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, where I'm the editor, people that are involved in this program or friends of the program. You can find that on our link tree as well. And of course, that's available at the Logger Line, and you can check out what they have to offer as well. With those plugs done, we'll wrap up. For James and Paolo, I'm Ben. Again, thanks to you for listening. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.